Our returning speaker is Dr. Robin Alter. And Robin, I think you can share your video if you, there you are, hello.
There I am, yes.
Hi, we're so happy that you've returned. Dr. Robin Alter is a registered clinical psychologist in practice since 1979. She's consulted to the Children's Mental Health System in Toronto and York Region for over 40 years. She's comprehensive private practice offering assessments and treatment of children, adolescents, and adults. She's taught courses in psychology at York University and is the author of a couple of books, including Anxiety and the Gift of Imagination and the Anxiety Workbook for Kids. She's an ongoing trustee with the Psychology Foundation of Canada, now known as Strong Mind, Strong Kids Psychology Canada, for the past 10 years in a variety of capacities. And we're so happy you've decided to join us today. Thanks, Robin.
Okay, so you're going to move the slides, or Pamela?
Yep, I've got them.
Okay, so I'm really excited today to share this information and talk about nature and how it affects us and how it affects our kids. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. You can turn the next slide. Before I tell you where this is, I do want to say that I read a lot of the questions that were sent to us beforehand, and it's pretty clear to me that most of you probably know, I can take out the probably, most of you know that nature is good for us, and it's good to get outside, and something really good happens when we get out there. But I hope that by the end of this presentation, you will know why. You will really have a good understanding of how it affects us. And there's been such incredible research that the last 40 years, but even more so in the last 20 years. And now we have a much better understanding. And I think we have been seriously not giving nature credit, really underestimating the amount of benefit that nature has for us. So one of the things you're going to learn, we're going to go over a lot of the research, is that, being in nature is beneficial, and probably more beneficial, but just looking at nature is beneficial. So one of my gifts to you, to all of you today, is some of these photographs that were taken by my husband on some of our trips. So the good news about that is I don't have to pay royalties for any of these photographs. But this one is in Hawaii. There are, just millions of waterfalls all over the planet. And, I'm sure some of you have seen many of them, but, people flock to them because just being there is a benefit to us. But even just looking at pictures is a benefit to us. So that's one of the reasons that I've included a lot of these photos. Okay, next slide. So some of the topics that we're going to cover are historically, what do we know from history about how people have related to nature or seen it as healing and beneficial. And I divided up the research, or I tried to. There's just volumes and volumes of research. So I couldn't include it all, but I tried to include the highlights. There's research on just looking at visual images of nature, how that affects people in various situations. There's research on what happens when we actually immerse ourselves in nature. And then, more recently, as the, medical imaging capability has improved, and, we've made great strides in imaging research, we can now go inside the body and look at, what's actually happening to us when we look at nature, when we get immersed in nature. And that's something that people in previous centuries didn't have access to. And then there is specific research, which I'll share with you on how it affects kids and youth. But as I said before, we have greatly underestimated the way human brain is influenced by physical environments, such as water, vegetation, and animals. Okay, next slide. Let's get on to it. So if we go back in history, several thousand years ago, there was traditional Chinese medicine, which talks about the mountains and trees and plants and bodies of water, that they're filled with a kind of energy that they try to incorporate in their medical techniques. And if you go back to the Roman time, which was, maybe 2,000 years ago, the philosophers and the physicians gave as therapy, gave as recommendations to improve mental health and sleep: get outside, take a walk in the garden. They would have rooms that had more light, and they'd put people in and just have them sit in the light, in the natural light, in the sunlight. And also, staying close to water, just breathe in the air that is close to water, which we know has more ions in it. Now we know that. They didn't know that. They just observed that people felt better and seemed to improve. Their medical conditions improved when they were near water. Okay, next slide. Next slide. Okay. This is another one of my husband's photographs. Oh, go back a second. We don't want to. Can we go back to the, yeah. So these are orchids that were in an orchid farm in Hawaii. And, just looking at them kind of brightens up your spirits. They look like they're dancing or they're saying hello, look at us, marvel at our beauty and our symmetry and our design and our color. This is my gift to you. Okay, next slide. And then, what we know about the 1800s, the 19th century, there was the rise of cities in North America and also in Europe. But we have naturalists such as Henry David Thoreau and John Muir. Now, Thoreau, you may be familiar with. He wrote of many things. He wrote a book called Walden, Meditations at Walden Pond. And John Muir, who was an American naturalist who was responsible for many of the nation's parks. Parks like the Grand Canyon and Yosemite, and just this idea that we have to preserve nature and also make it accessible to all of the citizens. And they wrote extensively about how nature is essential to our well-being. And, and there's much been written about the stresses of modern life. There's too much noise. We get too much stimulation. There's too much smoke, overcrowding. And right now, more than 80% of Canadians actually live in cities. There's a vast wilderness of Canada where nobody is living in. And in less than 20 years, the projection is that 75% of all the world's population will be in cities. And, doctors, in the last century, in the 1900s, began prescribing nature and exposure to nature to reduce stress. Okay, next slide. So this is Muir Park in California, where the redwood trees are, and lots of greenery here and a path. This probably wouldn't have looked so inviting had it not been for that path, which makes it look very safe. And we'll talk about that in a little while. But, you can appreciate just the beauty and the majesty of these trees. Next slide. So, people were prescribing nature retreats, and this was a time when nature retreats flourished. People went, to farms and spas, and they were called sanatoriums. They were advertised in medical journals, the way that pharmaceuticals are now. But at that time, this is a place you can send your patients where they can be replenished and revitalized. So, the interesting thing is that it all made sense and it had this historical background, but there wasn't a lot of research to support those conclusions. The research was inconclusive. And lo and behold, in 1950, a pharmaceutical company developed the first tranquilizer. It was called Milltown, and it was quickly followed by Valium, which you are probably familiar with, and other benzodiazepams. And it took the place in the medical journals, and it was prescribed widely, for a way to feel better, calm down, get rid of your anxiety. Next slide. And lo and behold, a lot of those sanitariums and a lot of those nature retreats disappeared. I do want to mention Edward O. Wilson, who is a very famous biologist and scientist, and he has a body of work which is very interesting to read about, because he talked about how we, human beings have an emotional affiliation to other living organisms. We don't just stand alone. We don't just exist on our own. And that, he talked about our preference for, different aspects of nature that seem to be universal all over the planet. People have these preferences. They're not taught. They seem to be innate. They seem to show up in early infancy. There are things like we prefer landscapes with trees. But it has to be just the right amount of trees. As I mentioned before, that picture of the redwood forest, it's very heavily treed, but because it has a path, it looks safe. If a landscape is just trees with nothing else, it's there's this in our DNA. We know that that's not safe, because something could be hiding behind the trees, or we don't see an escape route. So the reason we like landscapes with just the right amount of trees is that there's a safety factor for us. And this is because of our experience for millennium, that we didn't want to be trapped in a forest and not have a way out. The same thing's true about vistas. We like to be able to see far into the future because we could see an enemy coming. We could see that if there's safety, or we could see that there's danger. We like to see fresh water because we need it. We need it for life. We can go longer without food than we can without water to survive. And we like to see a rich variety of plants and animals because that's our food supply. Okay, next slide. Biophilia, by the way, is a Latin word, and it means having an affiliation with biology. We have an attraction to and a connection to all of the diverse aspects of life forms on the planet. These are some peacocks. I don't remember exactly where we took that photo, but I don't think we were out in the wild. It was probably in a zoo somewhere. I do like to stay away from zoos, but sometimes we go there because the only way we can see certain kinds of animals. Anyway, next slide. This is definitely Florida, where my mother lived for many years, and I got my degree. And this is an egret swimming, and I think that's a little duck. And, you see the fresh water and the greenery. Next slide. Okay, and just with some of E.O. Wilson's research shows that, the DNA is the way we respond to nature is so embedded in our DNA that we respond to ancient threats even more than to current ones. So, for example, they showed people pictures, and some of the studies they just show people a picture for like a nanosecond. They don't even give them time to really absorb it and to identify it. So it's being identified unconsciously, but people tend to react more to visual images of spiders than they do to visual images of cars. And clearly cars are more, we have more car accidents and can be harmed by cars than we can be harmed by spiders. But in our ancient history, spiders were more dangerous than cars. And so when we're shown pictures of spiders, our subliminally, our amygdala, which is where fear is registered in our brains, respond much more strongly and more intensely than to images of cars. Our reactions are connected to self-preservation, our needs for water, nutrition, shelter, and safety. And so E.O. Wilson says we have a 2 million year relationship with the natural environment that's imprinted in our neurons. So let's look at how immersion and deprivation work for us and against us. Immersion in nature or deprivation from nature. Next slide. This is definitely Hawaii. As we were driving along, I am often in the car screaming at my husband, stop the car, because we have to take this photograph. And this is one of those photographs. Of course, you can't hear the surf as it's smashing against the rocks, but I think you can feel that energy just from the splashing. Next slide. Okay, so now we begin, the research that actually has transformed our understanding is a man named Roger Ulrich. He was at the University of Michigan in 1979, and he started noticing that the people that worked at the university were showing up late, taking a much longer and slower route to get to the mall in the area around the university because it was a more scenic route. And so for them, it was more important to see the nature and the scenes than to have the quickest route. And so he started doing research on this. And he would stress the students, after they had a big exam, or especially if they got bad news about an exam, this was all fabricated for the study. But after the exam, they looked at pictures of either natural settings, trees, lakes, nature scenes so some of the students looked at nature scenes and other students looked at urban scenes, urban buildings and cars and streets. And the students that looked at nature scenes afterwards reported positive affect, feelings of affection, feelings of playfulness, friendliness, elation. They were much happier. And they had fewer feelings of anger and aggression, whereas the students that looked at urban buildings reported more feelings of sadness. Okay, next slide, please. And remember, this is just looking at things. And at the same period of time, there's lots of research, some of which from other parts of the planet. Taiwan did a lot of work in this area. And again, I'm only reporting on some of these. It would be impossible to report all of them. But older adults that were in residential care in Texas had lower levels of cortisol scanning after they looked at photos of the environment. There were plants in Kansas State. They did a study of just if you put a plant in a room, if you showed an emotional video to people, and that they had a plant in their room, their EEG, their electroencephalogram, went back to normal after watching an emotional video. So just having a plant in the room made a difference. And then that study in Taiwan, after people looked at nature scenes, their EEG, which had higher alpha, which is considered a positive sign in the EEG, they had better EEGs, they had better EMGs, which look at the muscular and the, you know, your neurons, your you know, that part of your system, and also your galvanic skin response, which is when we're anxious or we sweat a little tiny bit, and the galvanic skin response picks that up. So looking at nature scenes improved all of those physiological measures. Then in another study, I'm not sure where this was done, 119 adults transplanted plants. So some of them actually transplanted actual plants, and some of them were just taking soil with no plants in them and moving soil from one pot to another. So the people that actually transplanted the plants had higher alpha waves. That's a better EEG. They had a lower EMG, so that they had a better response in their neurons, and they were less tired. Next slide. Nature scenes also produced higher alpha waves on EEG and also higher serotonin production. I thought this was important because, you know, so much of our antidepressant medication is all about serotonin. It doesn't produce serotonin, those antidepressants, but they block your ability to reabsorb the serotonin that you produce. So it keeps the serotonin in your brain a little bit longer. But nature scenes actually produce serotonin. So, you know, one of the things I always tell people when they're on antidepressants is you still have to produce serotonin so that the antidepressant can work to keep it in your brain. How do you produce serotonin? You have to do things that make you happy. One thing that produces serotonin, get out in nature, look at nature scenes. And then another study showed that when people watched a stressful video and then an urban or a nature scene, the people who looked at nature scenes had a more rapid and complete recovery. So everybody gets upset after they watch a stressful video, but then, you know, you talk about resilience. How do you get back to neutral? How do you get back to normal? And the people that watched nature scenes did that much more quickly. So the scientists concluded that nature acted like a visual Valium, and that the people that were in that experiment, after they watched the nature scenes, their functioning was even better than before the experiment. So they actually didn't just get back to normal, they actually got back to better. In another study, they looked at 872 blood donors as they were waiting to donate their blood. And usually there's a TV in the waiting room. And the best results was if there was no TV. But the next best was if there were nature scenes on the TV. And the worst results had to do with daytime TV. No surprise there. Okay, next slide. So those are all just looking at scenes, not even being in the scenes. But here, the next group of studies will look at what happens when we actually immerse ourselves, go out into nature. And in 1982 in Japan, they started a program called Shinrin-yoku, which means forest bathing. And this has gotten a lot of publicity. Some of you may already know about this. Yoku means bathing, showering, and basking in. And they did studies showing that being in the forest versus walking in a laboratory, the cortisol levels lowered more when you were actually in the forest. And then they had a study where 500 adults spent time in the forest, and they showed that it reduced depression, hostility, improved sleep, increases vigor, and feelings of liveliness. And they had 12 studies, 24 different forests. They were thinking, well, maybe it was just this forest. Should we have to look at all these different forests? And they had overwhelming results. The people that were in the forest had lower levels of cortisol. Cortisol, by the way, if you've taken any of our Kids Have Stress 2 programs, cortisol is the stress response. When we get stressed, our body produces cortisol. And so there were lower levels of cortisol. Blood pressure was reduced, your pulse rate reduced. It basically increased the parasympathetic system, which is the system that calms you down. The sympathetic system activates you, and the parasympathetic system calms you down. And this is very, very important for our time. It improves the immune system. And again, they reported that, if you're in an environment with trees, it shouldn't be more than 30 to 40% of the surface area. So if you're in a forest that's completely covered with trees, it activates your sympathetic system because it can signal danger. And they reported that the changes persisted up to a full week, which is incredible. You go to a forest one day and you're better for an entire week. Okay, next slide. Next slide. Okay, this is a farm that we visit out near Coburg. Any of you are out in that area. These are friends of ours that built, they're off the grid, so that's their windmill. And I just wanted to show a picture of trees. Now, this is probably more than 40%. I'd say this is more like 60%. But, it does have the clearing in the front and also the clearing in the back, as opposed to the next slide. Next slide, please. Which is more like 50%, but it doesn't have that clearing. So I don't know, you can make your own judgments about whether this is going to lower or increase your, is this going to activate your parasympathetic system or your sympathetic system? For me, the colors always have a calming effect. Anyway, next slide. This is Bouchard Gardens out in BC. Those of you who are in BC, you probably maybe even recognize this. But it's, it has the water, it has the clearing, it has the vista, has the greenery, has the sky reflected in the lake. It has so many of those characteristics that produce that calming, healthy effect that we're all looking for. I have this picture, this photo in my office when I go there. Next slide. And this is a rear shot of me on a canoe trip that my husband and I took a few years ago. But it was one of those idyllic days, and we just had the most glorious time. We were canoeing for, I don't know, about 7 hours. Next slide. Okay, so some of you may be surprised about these studies. I certainly was, because this is all about how important and what the effect is of just having plants in our environment. And in the 60s, plants were sort of the rage, and now we seem to be, everybody wants to have what is it, minimalist, have less things in your environment, so when you look around, you see nothing. But the research shows that, like, for example, adults with identical surgeries recovering in different rooms, the ones that had plants in their room or an outdoor view of trees, those patients had shorter hospital stays, fewer post-surgical complaints, and used less pain medication. And I found 3 studies, or I'm reporting on 3 studies here, but there are many, many studies. One thing I forgot to mention before we started all this research is that in science, when you have 1 or 2 studies, it's interesting, but but you haven't proven anything. You can't say that something is a fact. But when you have many studies, all saying the same thing, when you're looking at it from different directions, you're looking at it in different ways, when the same studies are replicated over and over again, when you show reliability and validity, that's when you can say that you have found something factual. And I think, in terms of the effect of nature on our well-being, we are definitely approaching fact here. The annual prison records of their sickness showed that they were not sick as often when there were plants nearby. In Norway, when there were plants near a workstation, those people had less sick leave. In Australia, when there were plants nearby, it reduced anger, anxiety, depressive thoughts, and fatigue. Okay, next slide. And then they looked at, scientists looked at population data. So in Florida, they looked at the 5-year data regarding stroke, actually regarding mortality that was caused by stroke. And it was greatly reduced if people were living near green space. In Shanghai, they found that people living near parks live longer. And all these studies controlled for other variables like income or socioeconomic status. 337 children living near a green space showed better reactions to stress. So in other words, their amygdala, which is the part of your brain that reacts to stress, was cooled off by nature and fired up by urban environments. And the conclusion from these epidemiologists were that green space and plants are actually capable of saving lives. Sounds like a strong statement, but there is so much data to support it. Next slide. So what do we know about research and the research on nature and kids and youth? So I already mentioned the one about kids living near green space. It's another study, 71 rural and suburban elementary schools. They looked at 10,000 fifth graders. And the kids that had a view, like when they looked outside their classrooms, they had view of greenery, of trees. And there was another study that showed that if it was just a mowed lawn, it wasn't as effective, but trees and bushes, yes, versus parking lots and walls. The kids that looked at green space, trees and bushes, had higher scores on reading, language, and math proficiency. Next slide. I wish I had taken a photograph of, we had a trip in the Netherlands. We went on bicycles, my husband and I, and our cousins. And one of the best scenes that I saw was an elementary school, and these were kindergarten kids, all wearing their yellow boots. And I found out later, I did a little bit of investigation, and in the Netherlands, as part of the curriculum, everyone has a garden plot. And, it rained a lot in the Netherlands when we were bicycling. We had ponchos that were great, but all these little kids were out there with their raincoats, identical yellow boots, and they were all gardening. They were all had their hands in the dirt, and they were planting, and they were taking care of their gardens. At Hingsdalcrest, where I used to work, we had a children's garden, And it was one of the most popular activities for the kids. They all got to decide what they were going to grow and spend time nurturing and taking care of their plants and watching the plants grow. Okay, next slide, please. I think it's another one of the kids taking care of their plants. Next slide. Next slide. So outdoor classrooms were once more in vogue, and they found that outdoor classrooms actually improved math and science scores. And data from 452 parents of children diagnosed with ADHD showed that spending time outdoors and in green settings, they were actually able to reduce the symptoms of ADHD. That those kids calmed down and were, had less attention problems. Next slide, please. And students that had a view of nature, trees, and a lake outperformed those with a view of bricks and mortar. There were 101 public high schools with classrooms and cafeteria. Some had views of green and some did not. And there was a significant difference on standardized tests, higher graduation rates, and future plans to attend university. Keeping plants in classrooms increased attentiveness. Okay, next slide, please. And this is a slide that I got from the internet. I don't know how many of you have ever been to Guelph Humber, but it's one big building, and it's like 8 stories high, very big stories, high ceilings. And one entire wall is called the living wall, and it's all vegetation. And so the center corridor, which, looks up 8 or 10 stories, one of the walls of that hall is greenery. And, I taught at, now this isn't a controlled experiment, but I taught at York University, which is all cement and no greenery anywhere. I taught there for 20 years, and, it always seemed like the students were depressed. They're just this glum feeling, permeated those rooms. And I spent some time visiting somebody else from the Psychology Foundation, David Danto, who's the head of the psychology department at Guelph Humber. And I hung around this hall waiting for him. And, people came up to me, said, you look lost, can we help you? They were smiling, they were laughing. The atmosphere in that room was so much different than what I remembered at York University. So again, it's not a controlled experiment, it's just my perception. But I do think that the people who go to school there and who work there love this feature that somebody had the foresight to build. I know these are kind of popular now. I go into restaurant when we used to go into restaurants. There's some restaurants that have living walls, some museums. It always, to me, creates a wonderful atmosphere and environment. Next slide. So the summary of the scientific data is spending time with nature reduces our stress level, stress hormones like cortisol, depression, blood pressure, heart rate, length of hospital stays, number of patient complaints. And these are all, have reached statistical significance. Yeah, next slide, please. And being in nature reduces less potent medication post-surgery, the number of complaints by nurses of patients, anxiety levels and measures of skin conductance, the amount of sick leave, level of empathy. That should be increases the level of empathy. Uh, um, Nature reduces, this is wrong, actually, I apologize. Nature increases our interest in environmental efforts to protect. It reduces ADHD medication. It increases or decreases the disease rate in a population, including cancer and stroke, and reduces mortality. It actually keeps people alive longer. Next slide. And nature increases our immune system, our energy level, positive thoughts, grades in school, rates of graduation from school, improves our EEG and our EMG functioning, and improves attentiveness. Next slide. We now have something called nature deficit disorder. And one of the reasons for this is that screens are taking up more time. But I want you to remember that not all screen time is the same. There's something called toxic screen time versus healthy screen time. And so if you're looking at nature scene, if you have to look at screens, try looking at nature or animals or, documentaries about nature. In a very real way, outdoors is being replaced by screens and indoor gyms. And the research shows that outdoor exercise is actually more beneficial than the same exercise done indoors. And we have to remember that our kids are developing and habits are being made. And so if we can bring our kids outside, different habits are going to be made. Next slide. So there are many reasons to go outside. It promotes creativity and imagination, teaches responsibility. Remember those kids watering the plants, provides different kinds of stimulation. It increases exercise. We're moving around more, makes them think, reduces stress and fatigue, and soft attention is better than distracted attention. There's less things to look at. Next slide. And so how can we motivate kids to get outside? I actually added a few to this. So the things that might, I realize that most of you already know you want to get the kids outside. So I hope this presentation has given you more fuel for that intent. But, phone a friend. Most kids are more willing to go outside if they're doing it with a friend. Enlist their competitive tendencies, keep track of how much, ask them to find things. Let's see how many, certain kinds of leaves you can find or certain kinds of plants you can find, and keep track so that you can see if you can find more than you found last time. If all else fails, bring the indoors out. Like a lot of things that you can do inside, you can do outside. You can bring a little table outside. You can do Lego outside. You can do art outside. You can play cards outside. A lot of the things that you might do inside, you can also do outside. Get a blanket, go to a park, a lot of the activities you might do inside, you can do outside. Teach new kids old tricks. Teach them the games that you used to play. Grab a dog. Dogs need to go outside. Anything with wheels or that moves, get toys, get bikes, get scooters, get balls, get, anything that brings you outside. Do a scavenger hunt. And I hope you can realize that if you can't go outside, at least look outside. It's okay to stand at the window and just gaze at the trees and the birds that come. Have a bird feeder so you can watch, encourage the birds to come. One of the things I realized that, I used to work 10 hours a day and I'd come home very stressed. And I'd walk in the door, and I'm very lucky that we live in Toronto, but we have a very nice yard, and it backs on a ravine, like many houses in Toronto do. And I would, I come in the house, I take off my coat, I put down my briefcase, and I immediately would just go to the window. I didn't do this. I didn't tell myself to do it. I just was drawn to the window, and I would gaze at the window for, I don't know, 5, 10 minutes, and just take in the scene. It changes with the seasons, and I started to notice that after 10 minutes, I was completely energized and ready to have my evening. I just let go of the stress of the day, and it just had this transformative impact on me. So, if all else fails, just look out the window. If it's a day that you can't get outside, you can look outside. And again, there are all those photographs that we now have that are available to us through the internet, documentary movies, and things like that. This is our trip to New Zealand. New Zealand is one of the most spectacularly gorgeous places on the planet, I think, at least in my opinion. This is New Zealand. New Zealand has mountains and rivers and everything. It's a lot like Canada, but more compact. So the conclusions are that sanitarium boom was not a bad thing. Maybe we could bring it back. Now we have a large population studies that support the stress buffering benefit of nature. We have hospital sickness and mortality data. We have academic achievement data. We have brain imaging studies that cannot lie. The brain, our well-being is absolutely influenced by nature. This is not just a romantic notion. Next slide. The mortality of individuals, nations, and the planet is dependent on the recognition and acceptance that nature is part of us. Our perception of stress, our mental state, our immunity, our happiness, and our resiliency are all chemically influenced by the nervous system and its response to the natural environment. Next slide. And next slide. This is Iceland. Iceland is all about waterfalls. This is Hawaii again. This is Hawaii, Kilauea Iki. My husband and I walked across that twice. It's fantastic. This is Giverny in outside of Paris. It's a Monet's place. This again is Iceland, with the rainbow in the Iceland. This is Kenora on eastern Manitoba. I gave a talk there, and I kept telling my husband again, stop the car, because that sunset just kept getting more and more beautiful. Next slide. This is a sunset in Hawaii. Thank you so much.
Wow, thank you so much, Dr. Alter. Oh my goodness, I feel rejuvenated just looking at your photos and listening to some of your stories, and certainly the research. Wow, I was really blown away with the Shinrin Yoku and how the results, like the benefits, can last up to a week. That's really incredible. I mean, if that's not motivation to get outside and go for a walk in the forest, if you can, then I don't know what is. And if can't, then what has been great news, I think, in this webinar has been that you can just look at a photo and be transformed, essentially. And that's incredible. Yeah, thank you. We've got some time for some questions, but I did want to just make sure that everyone knew that we've got this promo code. Here it is. Feel free to visit our website, and we encourage you to do so. All of the slides will be shared, the recording will be shared, so not to worry. But I will stop the share right now just so we can see Dr. Alter, and we've got a couple of questions and something that I wanted to relate actually in the chat room, which was really great. I know that you'll appreciate this, Dr. Alter, that somebody had mentioned that they've already learned to share nature photos with their class. So thank you.
Yeah.
So that's really cool. So thinking about, here we are in the midst of winter. This is in the deep cold. Do we know anything about the research as far as it? I mean, what I heard was that there's a lot of green. The green matters. Does looking outside on a cold winter day also have the positive impact?
Such a good question. my husband and I, our last trip was to Antarctica, where there's no green. And so I was thinking about sharing some of those photos with you guys, but there's no research that shows that looking at ice, even though it was beautiful, those icebergs and the ice formation. I mean, we were mesmerized by, at first I thought, do we really want to go to Antarctica? I spent a lot of time in winter. I get to see a lot of snow and ice, but it really was worthwhile. And it's just an extraordinary place, and it's a place that has not been spoiled at all by any urban environment. There's no buildings, there's no population. It's a very unique environment, and there's certainly a lot of wildlife. But as far as I know, I didn't find any research about looking at snow and ice. So if there are any researchers out there, maybe you want to do it. My husband and I we were looking out our back window, which we do every morning, and it is gorgeous out there today.
Yeah.
We got a good snow last night, and we have a lot of wildlife, so there's often tracks, and I don't like to look. It disturbs me because I wonder, well, what are those tracks? We have coyotes, and I'm not good enough. I can't decipher the tracks to know whether they're dogs or coyotes, and so it raises my stress response when I see them. But today there's no tracks, and it's just gorgeous with the sun shining, shadows. So I think that research is yet to be done.
Right. Yeah. So maybe somebody in Canada maybe we haven't discovered it, that somebody is on this webinar thinking about doing that. That would be incredible. I know
maybe it's even better. We don't know.
Yeah, could very well be better. A few people have mentioned their campuses, and I know Dr. Alter, you had shared with us the Living Wall at Guelph Humber. Curious about bringing this into elementary schools or high schools, recognizing that this is so important. Do you have any thoughts on how we could work to make our schools a little greener, or bring that greenery into our schools?
Well, it's going to be an uphill battle. I mean, like, the research is there, you go in with the research, because these walls are difficult to maintain. They're costly. I was working at Hinks-Delcres before I retired from there, and we had brought in lots of plants into the classrooms and into the treatment rooms. We weren't thinking of stress response, but we just wanted to make it a comfortable, inviting atmosphere for the families and the kids. And then it was taken over with new management, and the first thing they did was remove all of the plants because they said it was a health hazard. Believe it or not.
Yeah,
but one day I went by there, and all the plants were sitting outside, with signs on them, they were giving them away. So, we have, it's a bit of an uphill battle to convince people that, these plants, being close to plants is healthy. It's not a health hazard. It's the opposite.
Absolutely. Well, I think you've equipped us with this today, so I'm so grateful. I do
So
want to
somebody
share
just mentioned that they look at a brick wall. You can put a photo of trees on that brick wall. You can't remove the wall, but you can invite people maybe to draw on it, to draw pictures on that wall, or to put photos of greenery and nature on the wall.
Right.
And you've got the research to back you up.
Yeah, and it's, so much of our lives right now are on screens, are online, and there's just a wealth of beautiful photos. So I wonder even if opportunity could exist as far as staff meeting, share a few beautiful photos, maybe places you've been or places that you've seen on the internet that you want to go to, just to break it up.
There's a technology now to, it's like it's like a slide projector, and they project images onto walls, and then the images change, so it's not always the same image.
Yeah, great. Some really great suggestions in the chat. So I think what we'll do is we'll make sure that we get the recording out to everyone, and we get the presentation out to everyone. And I'd also like to share the chat, because I think there's some really cool suggestions here. But at this point, I see that we're at 1 o'clock. And so I wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you so much for being here. And I hope that you've learned a lot. We want to hear from you. So we'll be sending out a survey. So please let us know what you thought, what you want to learn more about. This is our opportunity to learn from you. And as well, I want to remind you that we're a charity, and if it is at all within your means and you're interested in contributing to the work we're doing, we're offering these webinars for free. But if it's within your means and you're able to, we'd definitely be happy for any kind of donation. And on behalf of Strong Minds, Strong Kids, Dr. Alter, thank you once again for joining us. And I'm excited to get outside. Yeah, can't wait.
Mandy, somebody asked if it was okay to share this information, and please, feel free. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, wonderful. Well, thanks again. And I hope that everybody has a great day, and yeah, get outside or at least look at a beautiful photo.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dr. Alter.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
bye-bye, everybody. Stay safe.